Send target data. Roger that. Ready to launch.
In northern Ukraine, in Chernihiv Oblast, a noteworthy moment occurred that affected the balance of power on the ground. Russian forces disabled one of the US-made M142 HIMARS missile systems used by the Ukrainian armed forces. The details of the incident are significant. After firing from a field near Svirok, the HIMARS was immediately changing position, as is typical for such systems. In other words, the hit-and-run tactic was in play. However, this time the escape plan did not work. As soon as the vehicle reached the main road, it was detected and shot down by a Russian-made jet-powered attack drone. The subsequent ammunition explosion showed that the system was completely disabled. This moment is not just about the loss of a vehicle. It raises the question of who can track whom for how long in the field. The critical point here is this. This strike does not appear to be a random encounter. It seems that rather than where the HIMARS fired from, it was tracked after firing. In other words, the target was not the moment of firing, but the moment of escape. This suggests that the Russian side did not merely react to the HIMARS, but established an active tracking and hunting chain. According to open-source confirmations, this incident marks the 5th verified HIMARS loss for Ukraine, which is irreversible. This number may seem small, but HIMARS is no ordinary system. We are talking about a limited number of units with high impact and a capacity that is not easily replaced. Therefore, each loss means not just the loss of a vehicle, but the loss of an operational option. However, there is a balance to consider here. This loss does not mean that HIMARS has lost its effectiveness on the battlefield. What has really changed is the level of risk. By using jet-powered attack drones for these types of missions, Russia is narrowing Ukraine's room for maneuver. The window of escape is shrinking. With each shot fired, the chances of survival decrease a little more. This leaves Ukraine with a difficult choice. Either HIMARS will be used further back, more cautiously, and more sparingly, or each shot will be taken at a higher cost. In both scenarios, flexibility on the ground is reduced. This does not completely eliminate Ukraine's long-range pressure capability, but it makes it more expensive. From Russia's perspective, the gain is not limited to the destruction of a single system. The real goal is to make the remaining HIMARS fire less. In other words, one strike affects not only today, but also the days to come. As such hunting examples increase, the Ukrainian side is forced to think twice before every shot. It is also significant that the incident took place in Chernihiv Oblast, a region relatively far from the front line. This shows that the assumption that the rear area is relatively safe for systems such as HIMARS is no longer valid. In other words, the threat is not only at the front, but also applies to every platform on the move. In summary, this incident tells us much more than just a HIMARS was hit. There is now a clear war of countermeasures on the ground. While Ukraine attempts to exert pressure with its precision strike capability, Russia is playing on surveillance, timing, and rapid reaction to limit this pressure. And this is precisely where the following question arises. If HIMARS can be hit, can HIMARS still upset the balance on the front lines? The next headline provides the answer to this question, along with the results on the ground. We saw that HIMARS could be hit. But the story doesn't end there, because the picture on the ground clearly shows that these systems can still disrupt the game. What happened on the Hryshyn line in the Pokrovsk sector of the Donetsk Oblast is one of the clearest examples of this. According to the Ukrainian side, Russian forces increased pressure to capture this village and began transporting reinforcements to the area. The critical detail here is the route used. Russia attempted to activate the logistics line between Shevchenkovy and Pokrovsk. In other words, it was not just an attack, but a planned, sustainable advance. At this point, the M142 HIMARS came into play again. Russian troops attempted to advance with more than 30 vehicles, including motorcycles, off-road vehicles, and light motorized platforms. This choice was not accidental. It was an approach aimed at reducing the effectiveness of systems such as HIMARS by using smaller, faster, and more dispersed elements. However, the outcome on the ground did not match the plan. Ukrainian forces detected some of these elements approaching Pokrovsk while they were still on the line. The first strikes came here. HIMARS fire, in particular, abruptly halted the Russian advance. The remaining vehicles were detected again on the southeastern outskirts of Pokrovsk. This time, they were not on the move, but seeking cover. So, the pressure was broken in two stages. First, the logistical flow was slowed down. Then, the elements on the ground were neutralized piecemeal. This tells us one thing very clearly. HIMARS is not just a remote strike vehicle. When combined with the right intelligence, it can completely disrupt the rhythm of an attack. The key point here is this. The pressure Russia sought to exert via Hryshine was not a one-off attack. It was part of a broader push along the Pokrovsk line. Without open logistics lines, sustaining this pressure is impossible. That is precisely what the HIMARS strikes targeted. Not the frontline troops, the flow that feeds them. So, when discussing the fact that HIMARS can be hit, we must also recognize this. These systems can still disrupt plans on the ground when used in the right place and at the right time. This is where the real problem begins for Russia. Because hitting a HIMARS does not completely eliminate the threat. It only raises the cost of using it. For Ukraine, the picture is more complex. On one side is the increasing risk with each shot fired. On the other is a capability that produces tangible results on the ground. This dilemma shows that HIMARS is no longer a comfortable tool, but it remains indispensable. And when these two come together, a very clear balance emerges on the field. HIMARS is no longer untouchable, but it's still not out of the game either. That's precisely why we need to look at the bigger picture in the next section. Because the space in which HIMARS can operate is largely made possible by gaps in the Russian air defense umbrella. There is no courage or luck alone behind HIMARS' continued effectiveness on the battlefield. The real determining factor is Ukraine's recent silent but systematic pressure on Russian air defense systems. Information shared by the Alpha Special Operations Center, affiliated with the Ukrainian Security Service, shows that this pressure is not random, but part of a long-term plan. But the issue here is not which system is being hit. The real issue is what chain is being targeted. Russia's air defense does not consist of a single layer. It is a structure that overlaps and complements each other, systems that detect threats at long range, elements that intervene at medium and short range, and radars that connect them all. What Ukraine is doing is not to attack this structure head-on. On the contrary, it is to weaken the backbone. Targeting radar and sensor infrastructure is particularly crucial here, because no matter how powerful an air defense system is, it loses its meaning when it is blind. Missile launchers may remain in place, but if they don't know what to hit, where and when, the system is effectively disabled. This is precisely where the impact of the operations carried out by Alpha units comes into play. The Russian air defense network may not be completely perforated, but intermittent gaps are forming. And these gaps open up a very critical area for Ukraine. This is precisely the area that HIMARS and long-range unmanned aerial vehicles are exploiting. Returning to the HIMARS hit in Chernihiv. Yes, it is now at greater risk, but as we saw on the Pokrovsk line, it can still be deployed at the right moment, because Russian air defense is not equally dense everywhere. In some areas, protection is strong, while in others, either radar is lacking or reaction time is insufficient. The "I can strike anywhere" approach is gone. Instead, the question of where are the gaps, where have corridors opened up, comes to the fore. And this makes attacks fewer but more selective. That's why for the Russian side, it's not just a matter of losing a system. The real problem is the cumulative effect of these losses. Every time a radar or air defense element is taken out, the remaining ones have to cover more ground. This makes them more vulnerable. The result is the following picture. HIMARS can be shot down. But there are still gaps that allow HIMARS to get onto the field. And as long as these gaps remain, Ukraine's long-range pressure does not completely disappear. It just turns into a more careful, more calculated, and riskier game. The picture that emerges is actually quite clear. Russia's air defense is not completely collapsed, but it is no longer in a position to protect every point at the same time. This is exactly what Ukraine is looking for, not absolute superiority, just enough gaps. And these gaps are not opened with a single big blow. They open gradually, piece by piece, over time. That's why it would be misleading to interpret every strike we see on the battlefield in isolation. The real impact emerges from the accumulation of these small fractures. And it is precisely at this point that we realize the war is being shaped not only on the front lines, but also behind the scenes, in unseen areas. What we see on the field today shows us this. This war can no longer be interpreted through a single strike, a single front, or a single system. When seemingly small moves come together, the real impact emerges there. That is precisely why we do not limit ourselves to merely describing what is happening. We strive to interpret the underlying causes and possible consequences together. If this analysis gave you a new perspective, don't forget to like the video and subscribe to the channel. Your opinions are important to us, and we'd love to see your thoughts on these topics in the comments. See you again in the next analysis video. Have a great day, everyone. See you soon.